The first proof for the existence of God that educasts require us to study is the cosmological argument. There have been numerous presentations of this argument from a range of scholars through the ages. This film will focus on Aquinas' presentation of the cosmological argument as required by the specification. Some points to remember in any explanation of the cosmological argument are, of course, the key vocabulary that we have already looked at. This argument is a posteriori and so relies upon sensory evidence. In this case, the sensory or empirical evidence that is provided is the existence of the cosmos itself and the phenomena within it. Aquinas pointed out that God exists is not a self-evident statement. It is a proposition which requires demonstration. So he attempted to demonstrate it through the use of the sensory evidence within the universe itself. Ultimately, this is an inductive argument, which of course means that the conclusion is one of a number of possibilities, and we must weigh up how convincing God is as a conclusion when set against other possibilities. It is sometimes called the first cause argument. We must recognise the parameters of this argument. If successful, the most it can do is prove God's existence. Aquinas himself recognised that while we might be able to prove that God exists, we will not necessarily be able to show that it is the God of classical theism. Aquinas presented his argument in his work SUMMA THEOLOGICA. He used a combination of Aristotelian logic and scripture. Through empiricist reasoning, or natural theology, he presented 5 ways, or demonstratio, in which he attempted to prove God's existence. Here we are only interested in the first 3, since these are the ones which make up the cosmological argument. This first way was profoundly influenced by the work of Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher. He noticed that movement or change required something to bring about that movement or change. By movement, Aquinas did not simply mean a change in position from point A to point B. Instead, he was talking about a change in quality or quantity, such as when people age or when water becomes ice. He is noticing here that things don't change randomly for no reason. Instead, they move because there is something that has brought that process about. He denies that this change of movement, with one thing being moved by another, which in turn is moved by another, can go back unchecked. Instead, he postulated that there must be a prime mover. What this means is that there must be a first mover or changer that must be unmoved or unchanged by anything before it. A start to the chain of movement, an unmoved mover. This unmoved mover would have to be unmoved in order to start the chain off and not be part of it. This is God. Aquinas gives the example of wood. Wood in its usual state would be cold. This is its actuality, its current state. However, it has the potentiality to become hot. In order to move from its actuality towards its potentiality, it undergoes change, but it doesn't do this spontaneously or without reason. Instead, it needs something actually hot which can bring about a new actuality for the wood. This would be fire, for example. Fire is actually hot and can move the wood towards hotness. The second way seems very similar to the first, but this time Aquinas is interested in events that are caused rather than movement. Here he looks at efficient cause, which means the thing that brings about an event. The efficient cause of a statue would be the person who carves it. The efficient cause of a line of dominoes would be the person who pushed the first one. For Aquinas, it cannot be possible that this chain of cause and effect could go on forever unchecked. Instead, there must be a start which requires a first cause or uncaused cause. This is God. Aquinas points out that with any chain of causality, we would have to recognise that there is a beginning, middle and end. Nothing can be the efficient cause of itself, as this would be impossible. It would have to exist before it existed in order to bring itself about. there must be an efficient cause to bring about the intermediate or middle causes, and these would bring about the ultimate cause or end of the chain. It is necessary logically to accept that there is a first efficient cause. Here, this is God. The third way is slightly different. There are elements within this way that are a priori, since some of the concepts contained within it are not empirically verifiable. Aquinas begins by pointing out something that is demonstrated in nature, and that the universe does contain at least some contingent things. Now, by contingent, he means things that are temporary or impermanent. These things are items that can not exist. You or I, for instance. There was a time when we didn't exist, and there will be a time when we don't again. If everything that exists were contingent, then there would have to be a time when there were no contingent beings. This is because if everything were contingent, then nothing is not contingent. The chain of contingent things causing each other would have to be contingent too, because everything is contingent. In this case, then, if we go back to the time when there were no contingent beings, then nothing could begin, since the definition of contingency is that it was caused by something before it. If there is nothing to begin with, then there is nothing to bring things about. Logically, this must mean that since there are contingent items here, there must be something that isn't contingent, that can start off the chain. This would be a necessary being. By definition, this is the opposite of contingent, which would mean that it is something uncaused, something that is infinite and cannot not exist. Whilst Aquinas recognises that this cannot be proved to be the God of classical theism, we can recognise a number of his characteristics from a necessary being.